Good morning, everybody. For those of you watching the YouTube channel, welcome back to the Labyrinth. And those of you listening on Stitcher or iTunes or on any of the other affiliates, good to see you, good to hear from all of you. I've got a really special series we're kicking off today. As you know, this is the year we're kicking off a little series. We've done one on self-publishing that is still ongoing, and then we've got this one here devoted to my debut novel, 13 Secret Cities. And as you may have heard in the previous show, we've got a really, really special guest who's going to actually get in the interviewer seat. He'll be the Terry Gross of the Labyrinth podcast for us today, and that's author Eyre Price, who has been on the show twice before. He is the author of Blues Highway Blues, Star Killer Star, and he is joining us from South Carolina. Is that right?
We are by the sea in South Carolina, so it's great to be with you.
That's poetic, by the sea. Great. Well, I'm going to do my best to basically be the guest of the show, and as I tell people, I will answer anything about the book. So just one caveat, everybody. We've got many of you guys joining us for the first time. Many of you are just discovering the book for the first time. You can find it at 13secretcities.com. It is going to be available on paperback on December 9th. We're just days away from that. And the full novel is already available as a Kindle novel in the Kindle store. So if you're just joining us, we are going to break into part one because the book is divided into parts, and we will do 3 more shows, each devoted to the other parts. And they will get more spoiler heavy as we go. So just be aware that we will treat you well in this one. We're not going to give you too many crazy spoilers. But as you're going deeper into the book, we're definitely going to discuss more of those details. So there will be more to come. And if you check out the book, it's only 99 cents in the Kindle store for part 1. So it's an easy way to join us as we get into this discussion. So, Eric, what do you want to ask me?
I think you touched on it. We had had a little conversation before we came on air, and I explained to you that I'm nervous not being in this position, but in handling a book in which almost nothing is what it seems to be when the reader first encounters it. And so my concern was giving away too much in our discussion. So I'm going to ask you as the author to introduce your Labyrinth audience to the 13 Secret Cities. Can you give us a little overview of what the book is, what the book's about?
Sure. I'll set it up in the way that readers arrive at the novel. The book, it's a full novel as a finished piece. It's about 300 pages. But the book begins literally in the middle of a history-changing event in Chicago, which is a march that is done for social justice in Millennium Park. For those of you who are not familiar with Millennium Park, it's beautiful. It was just done in the 21st century. It was supposed to be ready by the 21st century inauguration, but it wasn't. It's beautiful. It's used for a lot of concerts and events and festivals. In this riot, it takes place in 2013, and a young woman named Clara Montes is in the riot as it's beginning. And so the book really just takes the reader by the collar and jerks them into this situation of a pretty violent event. There is tear gas. There are people being trampled. And so her directive is to just escape and survive, which is what might happen to most of us if we were in a riot of that kind. As she does this, she is able to survive, but not without consequence. And I don't want to give too many details on that, but she is hurt. She's physically hurt by this situation. So as the book progresses, she survives the riot, and in her family there are very old traditions that they brought with them from Mexico, and many of her relatives keep telling her, well, you seem to have something about you, some sort of shadow or a bad vibe that you can't seem to shake off. and we're concerned about you because the fact that you were involved in this riot means that it's hovering around you. And so in order to shake it off, they fast track her through a rite of passage. In most cultures, there are rites of passage, but in her family, they happen at various points. There's the age of 13, and then there's one at 26. So it's not until you're 26 that you're considered an adult. And so for her to atone for what happened at the Millennium Riot, they say, well, you may not actually be 26, but we're going to have to send you to this place where you will atone and go through the rites. And that trip is the journey to Mictlan, which is the underworld of the Aztec mythology. And so the book is concerned with how these two sides of Clara's life come together. She is very politically involved. She lives in Chicago. She cares about social justice, and at the same time, she has her family and these values and these very old traditions pressing down on her because they have told her she has to make this journey. And I will say the book is concerned with that actual journey. Does that give you enough of a setup there?
I think that starts and following up my nervousness about starting to pull at this specific thread or that was that there's a lot going on in this book. There is an awful lot going on in this book. So let me ask you, when I met you, and it was not that long ago, you were blogging, you were doing those types of things. What's the transition to novelist? Was this something that was planned? What's the origin in your life of a career as a novelist and of the 13 Secret Cities specifically?
Oh, that's a really great question. It's come up many times on this show, so the listeners we've had the longest are very intimate with this story, but I'll tell it again, and I'm always glad to tell it. I've been writing since I was writing fiction, as in writing a story that I want people to read. I've been doing this since I was maybe about 11. And even at the age of, I think, 12, 13, I was already writing them out longhand. When I first got access to my parents' typewriter, I typed up my first story, which was sort of a ripoff of Stephen King. It was a short story about a brother and sister pair, and one of the children was sort of a bad child, and there was literally a monster in a box in their attic, and so the story was concerned with taking the sibling up there and basically letting the monster eat them. That was, I think maybe 14, 15. And then I kept on writing. I knew that maybe around the age of 15 that I saw the novelist as something that, as a vocation and job that would be wonderful to have, because that struck my passion for reading and writing. Now, I was already realistic at that age. My parents are not harsh people, and they didn't say become a doctor or anything. But I knew that novelists and the way to be a novelist is very difficult, and often you may not make enough money to live. And so I went into journalism right around like high school, and I kept on going into college. I kept on with journalism. I'm still a journalist, and I always did it as a way to be practical and make some sort of money in order to be able to continue writing my books and my short stories. Now, there's a lot of points in my life at which I thought, well, this is just something I do, and so I didn't write as much, or I didn't think I could do it. But a real turning point came for me right around the age of 29, where I mostly just had short stories at that point, only short stories. And I came back from a very long trip in Japan, and I just felt like maybe time was not running out, but time was more important at that point. I said to myself, if you're going to do this, you've got to do this. So I applied to creative writing programs for MFAs. I did not go. I got accepted into them, but I did not go. And I know that in those programs, sometimes they help you workshop a novel, but I had read Stephen King's On Writing, and that book, he really is a believer of, like, if you're a writer, it's not something that people can teach it to you. And though that book sort of resonated, I didn't get to find that out until later. And so the point is, I really don't think any schooling could have ever taught me how to write these books and these stories. What helped me was to actually write them. And so in my 30s, I was very lucky. I had a script for a stage play put up in Chicago with the Neo-Futurists. That was a real turning point. I sold my first short story in my 30s. And in 2009, M-Brain Press, which is a very tiny press, they were interested in my short stories, which became the 12 Burning Wheels as a printed book. And, you know, just like many people, I had a couple of manuscripts for novels that were just in a drawer, and I was pushing around to agents, and they just weren't making it all the way. You know, they would get pretty far, but not all the way. And I think those really helped me. They helped me a ton. But to fast forward to this project, by the time I was cooking up this idea of publishing my own stuff through my imprint, Solar 6 Books, I thought I was going to do a sequel to the 12 Burning Wheels. So some people have noted, oh, well, you've got the sequential numbers, like 12 Burning Wheels is 12, and then 13 Secret Cities is 13, so it's like 12, 13, 14. And they're sort of right. And I started it literally as a couple of short stories that connected to characters and themes from the first book. As soon as I started, this book was already emerging as its own thing. And I can't explain how. I just know the image of Clara in the riot was already there. And so the book does connect in some very light ways to the stories of 12 Burning Wheels. But by the time I was ready to go live with like my own independent publishing, I said to myself, no, I can do this as a full novel. As you and I have talked about, and some listeners know on the show, I also publish full novels through a pen name. And so those also taught me a lot on how to structure a book, how to release it, how to pace myself in my life to do it. So those led up to releasing this project, which is something I'm very excited about because it is my debut novel under my regular name, and it has themes that I've been working on for basically all my lifetime.
Yeah, well, let's move on, because one of the things that I was struck by, there you are in New York City, a grown-ass man in New York City, and how is it that you found your literary voice in a 19-year-old woman, college student in Chicago? Was that natural? Did Clara just speak to you? Was that a more intellectual and purposeful intent?
It happened in two ways. One is with most of my books, the book starts with a character usually, but they're set in an image that's so vivid, it's like a dream, I can see it. I discover the character usually in a few writes and rewrites of that character. Sometimes I'll even write short vignettes about that character to help me figure out who they are. So with her, I saw her first in the riot, and her motivations, her family, her personal tics, those came out later as I started writing her out. But in terms of the fact that she is unlike me because she's a woman, that actually was something I had been wanting to push further. I have one other manuscript that I've written. Well, I have two novels besides this one, right, that never saw the light of day. The first one was written from a male point of view. The main character is a young man in his 20s, and that novel actually is connected to this one, so we could talk about that. There's a giant green structure that's in part 2 and 3. That novel is concerned with how that structure was made. But book 2 featured a female detective in a city that was very similar to Chicago. And so I had already attempted to write from a woman's point of view, but I did want to try something that was closer to a young person, YA, I guess is what they call it now, and I wanted it as a technical challenge to see if I could find my voice in a character like that. And so it was deliberate in a way, but I couldn't, because I don't outline, I don't make character profiles, I couldn't make it happen until she arrived to me one day in this image of Pritzker Pavilion at the Millennium Park with all this gas exploding and people being trampled. That's how she really arrived.
I will have to, and I'll follow up. You and I have had a number of conversations away from this on a personal level about genres of books, and you had previously considered this to be a YA novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I took issue with that, and I said that I didn't see it as a YA novel. I wonder what your impression is, number one, just of slapping a genre on a book and identifying it by genre. And now that you've gone back, do you still consider the book to be YA?
Yeah, so my opinion continues to evolve on what it is. At the beginning, I definitely saw it more as YA, and when I was writing it, I thought, oh, this is my answer to great books that I've loved, like Hunger Games and Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. But then when it was done, as I wrote it, and then when it was done, I said to myself, wow, there's something different here that I wrote that isn't necessarily like slotted into that genre. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm really happy I publish independently, because this book is going to be a challenge to get discovered by readers, because it's not necessarily YA. It can be. A lot of young people have read it. I've actually been lucky enough to have this be read in a semester by Towson University students. And so they were education students. They read it. They were all probably about 20, 21. They really latched onto the themes of it. And it might be because they're reading YA. So it resonated for them. But then what I'm discovering is adults who read it are coming in, many of the adults who like it, they're coming in from other sides, other genres that they appreciate. So it would be adult thrillers, horror fans really seem to like this novel. And so I'm kind of, what I'm trying to do right now, especially because I'm a young author and I'm basically an infant when it comes to the world of publishing, I'm trying to stay really open-minded and fresh and let my literary voice take me to the next place, because I still don't know exactly what kind of book this is. I mean, to me, it's a novel. It's what I call an adventure story, but the elements and the way in which I wrote the YA kind of stuff is not typical YA. There's a lot of swearing. There's some very intense violence, and then there are notions about death that are maybe, I don't know. I've only seen maybe one YA series that sort of touches on this, and it still was more of a kind of a younger audience they were targeting. This was the Sabriel books. It's the Aborson trilogy by Garth Nix. He's Australian, and in that book, it's set in sort of medieval times, so it's different. It's very fantasy, but the young woman in that book, her father is a necromancer, so she has to learn how to, take his powers and fight some big demon or whatever. But it's very much typical fantasy. And what I wrote here is not typical fantasy either. It's not urban fantasy either. So I don't know. Like I said, my opinion continues to evolve on it. But I've recently told myself, you know what, chill out, because you're going to be writing other books, and the other books will also inform what we call these genres or subgenres.
Because the thing that struck me about Clara is, typically when you think of YA, you think it's those high school years. All the books that you cited, Harry Potter, Hunger Games, they're all high school years. And then it doesn't surprise me that the students at Towson State responded the way they do, because that's really a period of life that you don't necessarily see reflected in literature. There's a plethora of 20-somethings, but Clara's 19, and that's kind of a specific age, because you're not a child, you're not an adult, you're in some nebulous in-between state. Was that something, again, is that a happy accident when Clara comes to you in that vision? Is she already 19, or is that something that you thought about?
No, I knew she was 19. It was clear as day. She was 19, and she was in that that transitional phase, literally like weeks into her new life in college. So she was leaving her home, going into a new place, and I just knew the number was right. Numbers figure prominently in all my books, so sometimes I can actually see the actual number associated with the character. It sounds really weird, but I could actually see the number 19 with her. So,
So that's how Clara came to you as Clara.
hmm Yeah, she was. That's who she was. Even her name came to very quickly. You know, with characters, sometimes, you know, you'll have it, but you don't know their name. With her, it was just very clear. So, and same with her brother, Jose Maria. He was suddenly just there. So, it's not the case with every single character. Some of them I really have to work hard to bring out, and in many cases, I'm sometimes not happy with the finished product. Sometimes I wish I could have pulled out even more about individual characters, but with her, it was very clear to me.
Now, when you bring the 13 Secret Cities out, you did so in kind of a unique way. It comes out in 4 very separate parts. It has since been collected in a Kindle Omnibus edition, and as you've said, there's a paperback that will include all 4 parts, but it can be argued that these are 4 parts that combine to form a greater work, that it's not necessarily a novel, but 4 novellas that work together. Is this intentional on your part? Does this come from being a short story writer at heart? What was the motivation to bring it out in this way as opposed to a more traditional, I wrote a novel, here's the novel?
Okay, it seems like for all of these, I seem to have 2 answers for you on everything, but that's okay. That's me. One is, again, back to numbers. I really, really, really love numbers, and I love how numbers can interlock. And so what you just mentioned there, the fact that you've got 4 pieces that are one, but then potentially that one is part of more pieces, and then even in hinting with the name that there's 13 cities, would that be 13 books? You know, do we know that? I love how that works. So that's one. Visually, I like how the numbers work. But the serial, the way I chose to do this, you know, it really has to do with what I thought were the levels of quality of the other 2 books. Like I said, the first 2 books I had were pretty much fantasy books, just like this one, you know, or things that touch on fantasy. And I looked at those very critically, and I was like, would I ever self-publish these? Because I self-publish. And as I looked at them, this is where I hope I'm a wiser person today. I was like, they're just not that great. Like they're not ready to be out in the public because I don't think they're ready. And I knew that this concept, as it was emerging as a sequel to 12 Burning Wheels, and it was becoming a full story that was pulling in on the mythology that I had built, in my heart, then I knew, okay, this is ready to go out. But I thought, I don't have the finished manuscript. And I was very inspired by people like Charles Dickens and Alexander Dumas, and I thought, you know what, I want to try this. And, you know, you're published through Amazon. When you're published officially through them, there's a few authors who get these official Amazon serials, you know, where like people subscribe to the whole book and then they get the installments delivered automatically. I was very envious of that. I was like, oh, I want that. And since I'm not officially published that way, I was like, well, I will do it myself. And so I promoted all the books on the podcast. I put them up on the website, and people could find them. And it's been a challenge business-wise, you know, sort of how do you do that? How do you let people know? But the intention was to write a serial as a way to challenge myself, because I do have a day job still, and I was like, I can balance this if I pace myself out, and doing it in chunks that way really helped me do it.
Now, again, we have a personal friendship, and so I think I know where I'm leading. You paced it. Did the fact that you were writing in chunks, looking back now, did that affect the overall project? Was that were the rolling deadlines, did they influence the project itself?
Yeah, I would say 100%. And in fact, I believe, I don't know if this is true because I need years of insight, but I believe it actually helped my writing because I was asking people for money, like pay me 99 cents for this piece or $3 for this piece. And in order to do that, I not only had to make it super exciting, and I mean exciting, like make this like something I really want to turn pages, but I also had to work very hard at building cliffhangers. Just like the Saturday morning serials from like the early 20th century. I was like, how am I going to build up excitement and intrigue to the very last page so that by the time you get to the last one you go, oh fuck, what am I going to do? Or like, I need to find out what happens next. That was something I had never really challenged myself to do, and I think most novelists should try that because, well, you're familiar with this. You actually write in the thriller genre, and you have a lot of action and suspense. And the only way to do that is to, again, teach yourself how do you get to these points where people go, oh man, like what's gonna happen next? This book really taught me how to do that, and so it's something I plan to do with the rest of them as long as I keep doing the serial format. But even if I didn't, even if I did a regular novel, now I see the benefit from a writing point of view of just making things exciting for the reader. You want to satisfy the reader even when you're satisfying yourself as an artist.
And I'll follow up on that, and you're absolutely right. I write thrillers, and my publisher wanted thrillers in a series, and that admittedly made things difficult for me. Ordinarily, when you write a novel, it's got a fairly standard story arc to it that's resolved by the end of the novel. I found that when you are writing a series or when you're writing serials, you get stuck in the middle of that story arc, and that's frequently a very, very dark place. You don't have the opportunity to bring about the emotional resolution that everything's going to be all right. And so often those middle books, which essentially on a grander scale are that second story arc, often those middle books have a tendency to be very dark. Was that something that concerned you in writing book two and three, and in writing book one at the end of book one?
It's something I wanted, in fact. Some of my favorite pieces of art that are narratives in life, like they go that way. You talk about Lord of the Rings or Don Quixote or even the Ring trilogy by Wagner. The places you're going to go in, essentially sort of the middle part, are extreme and dark and intense. I really, really wanted to challenge myself with that. It's something I'm also experimenting with the books under the pen name, and so it was important for me that I go there. One, to make things exciting, but also, even if you just talk to a super Star Wars nerd, like which of the original trilogy do they love? It's always Empire Strikes Back, and it's really the harshest and darkest of those movies. And it's because it really, brings up the drama to here, but it also connects, because we all have these dark feelings sometimes, and so I think it's good to write about.
Yeah. Isolated from.
I'll move on now.
Yeah.
As you know, I think it's a mistake to dismiss anything as a YA novel. I don't like genres. I don't like any sort of broad generalities like that. I think it would be impossible, however, to discuss the book without discussing it as a Latino book. And so I was curious as I read it, where you see yourself in an emerging class of Latino artists, of Latino writers, at a time when there really hasn't been a significant Latino population in American literature, and that now is swelling, as is the Latino readership. And I was wondering where you saw yourself in that context.
So it's hard for me to talk about how I see myself without talking about how I wish I could see myself. Let's talk about that, and then I'll tell you how I actually see myself. I grew up with parents who are big readers, and we had a wonderful collection of books in our house in Mexico City, and they're both college educated. They've gone to graduate school, and for us, for many Latinos, now I'm going to generalize about all of us. Some of our biggest heroes in the culture are our writers. Carlos Fuentes and Jorge Luis Borges, most recently Roberto Bolaño. These are people that, in some ways, are ambassadors to our countries that we came from. And so, I myself am a person who's traveled between countries quite a bit. I've lived in the U.S. and Mexico intermittently because I have family on both sides and I have dual citizenship. And as I've done this, because I've had in my heart to be a writer, I really see those guys as my heroes. Carlos Fuentes in particular. He was just an amazing person, and he was talented in areas even outside of writing. And so, as I look at where we are today, like 2014 in the United States, so you're right. There is a rise of Latino readership, Latino population, and writers. We've got people like Junot Diaz who are now, winning these awards and really making a name for themselves. How I wish I could see myself is that I'm making a dent in how we're perceived up there. One of the reasons I wrote this book with a woman of color, with a family situation like she has, with these Aztec gods, is because I don't see myself represented in these kinds of books usually. There are wonderful books out there, but it's usually medieval mythology, unicorns, Nordic gods, and characters that are white, or male and white. And so I thought, this is something I want to change because I can change it. I can imagine this. That was really the inspiration. I can imagine myself out of the limitations of what the culture is giving me. So what place I might actually take right now, that I don't know. I'm unique because everyone's unique, but I was born in Mexico City. I grew up most of my early life there, and so my perspective on Mexican American topics is going to be a little different than actual Mexican Americans who have been born here, and I like that that discord. There's a little bit of a difference there, and so. Even the fact that this book is set the way it is, Clara is a very different character than anyone like me. She's actually not as in touch with her culture. She didn't really get to live in Mexico, and so I don't know what my contribution is right now. I would like to think that it is a worthwhile one, and as I'm going out there and promoting the book, I'm actually trying to just ask the question of people who are Latino. How does this book resonate for you? What did it do for you? Because I do want to make a contribution, and I don't want to be self-aggrandizing. So I don't know what the contribution will be until more people start, giving me feedback and tell me what it is. But I do think it's important for all Latino writers and people of color and people with disabilities and people who are transgendered, for all of us to be writing books like this.
Now, one of the things that I was struck with, and again, I'm nervous about giving up too much, is Clara's father takes her to Lake Michigan in Chicago, and that serves as a substitute for their home in Mexico City.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very striking to me, of people taking old customs and applying them to their new home. And that was one of the things that struck me about the book, is it has a great reverence for a Mexican heritage, but it is quintessentially an American book. And was how do you see that theme working out in your writing? This moving old culture into a new life and incorporating it into a new life.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for describing it that way, because that's exactly, it's a one-to-one relationship to how I feel about life. You know, I'm very proud to be an American, and there's great things in this country. But I also have reverence for where I came from. Now, as far as where that's all going, you know, I think it is a very American book, and I think it's the only way to, one, preserve traditions and ancestor worship. You know, when we talk about like what happened to great grandpa and the Mayflower or whatever, it's great to tell those stories, but writing and fiction can help preserve even more of that. At the same time, nothing stays the same. So the further we take these traditions and rituals into the 21st century, they're going to change. And so what you pointed out there is really amazing and incredible, because it's what I believe. Some of these traditions that came to us from the old world, the new world, from the Aztecs, the Mayas, they're still sort of with us as long as we choose to preserve them, but they will never be the same as, you know, when they were practicing them hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago. And that actually shows up many times in the novel. There are some other methods that are used in the novel, because there's elements of magic and the supernatural that could only happen with the tools that we have today in the 21st century. And so I'm very proud to include that stuff, because I do think that's how we are evolving as a species, but also hopefully preserving some of the great things that our ancestors taught us.
Now, I'm far from expert enough to get into any depth here, so I'll tread carefully. But my perception as an American is that Mexico, particularly as it's treated in the media, is kind of marginalized. There's been one story with the drug cartels that is what Americans see as Mexico. But there's much more happening in Mexico right now. Mexico is a nation undergoing tremendous evolution. And one of the things that I've noted is it seems to me as if there's a greater awakening for some Mexicans of their Aboriginal ancestry, of their Aztec origins, and with that, some corresponding tension between Mexicans that they might consider of a European, of Spanish origins. And I was wondering if you could talk to us just about, because so much of the book goes back to those Aztec origins, how you see those ancient origins influencing the evolution in modern Mexico that you call one of your homes.
Oh man, what a great question. I can tell you what my experience was growing up, and what I still believe is the case in Mexico. Obviously, the way the U.S. sees us through the media is a very particular and narrow lens. But once you're there, especially because I grew up there before this terror of the drug cartels was there. There weren't problems in safety or anything like that, and there still aren't. That's actually one of the safer cities. But the point is, I think Mexico, like any other country, every single country has an issue, because we're human beings, sometimes of dividing ourselves by how we look, or by skin color, or ethnic background, ethnic makeup. And so there are elements of racism that exist there, which are even noted in the book. You know, sometimes, many Latinos will relate to this. Sometimes a baby is born and they go, oh, you got a dark baby. Oh, you got a white-skinned baby. And that's because we're really mestizos there. That there are a lot of European features in our makeup, and then we have the Indian features. So that stuff exists. At the same time, I don't think anything's changed in the pride that the Mexican national feels in the blend of European culture and the original cultures that were there before. And so there's been a lot of pride in fostering that in education, and children are taught these legends and these myths, like the ones that are in the book. These are things I actually learned in school, so they're amazing to me, because in the United States we don't learn the myths of the Native Americans, but in Mexico you do learn about Quetzalcoatl and Coatlicue and all these different deities. So I do also think every decade or every few decades there are cycles. Sometimes there's more of an interest in that, and then there's other times when maybe other parts, the Western world or American culture, seem to be more in vogue. I do think, I agree with you, I think right now Mexico is going through a major flux. The violence going on with the drug war is unfortunate and really intense. I mean, there are some really terrible things there. There's also a lot of cultural revolution. For people who really read between the lines and who care to read the news stories, there's a lot of student protests. Like, the actual people are revolting against the government for corruption, and that corruption feeds into the drug war. At the very, very fundamental level, Mexicans are very much involved right now in an intellectual and cultural revolution, just like they did maybe about 100 years ago, and then before that 100 years ago. So there are things that make me very excited for Mexico. The way that it's covered in the U.S. is, I'm just going to say it in a nice way, in a polite way, it's very limited. But for anybody who cares to learn about that, I'm always happy to talk about it. And for those of you guys who are curious about the book is really not concerned with that, because the book really takes place in Chicago. But there are connections to that are referred to in the book that really have to do with exactly what you're talking about. The pride in basically the blend of the cultures, and what are we doing today as a species? Are we creating a revolution or not?
Now, there's a lot. I was speaking with a writer friend last night who writes, who lives down in the low country of South Carolina, and writes a lot about the hoodoo and those types of spiritual practices.
Yeah.
Hoodoo practices feature in my work, and certainly in my life. I was raised in an Irish Catholic community, but old world spirituality, if that's what it is, was never far away. And there's a lot of Aztec spirituality in these books. That's ultimately what sets Clara on her adventure. What roles did they have in your life? Were the old voices a part of your life growing up?
Yeah, that's another wonderful question, and one I'll try to get to you in a short way. For me particularly, it was more, I'm going to call it baked in. Like when you make a cake and you get the cocoa powder and the vanilla and the eggs, you're creating this great final piece that when you eat the cake, it's got all the ingredients in there. It was more like that for me. So there are regions of Mexico where some of the oldest traditions, the oldest rituals, they're still being practiced, and those people really speak Nahuatl and all these languages that are referenced in the book. I didn't grow up that way because I grew up in the city. My parents were more, I guess, part of modernized Mexico. I hate that word. But the way in which I grew up was Catholic, right? Raised Catholic, went to Mass every Sunday, did my first communion, etc. But you would be surprised that the level at which legends, tiny little rituals, the food in particular in Mexico, and even just little tiny superstitions, they are really that part of the culture. Aztec, Olmec, Maya, Teotihuacan, all of them, you're living them all the time, because you're actually using words that call those names up. And so it was the cake. You know, it really was baked into what I did. Now, I think when you are an educated person in Mexico, you sometimes have to fight the tide to go and find it again, to go deeper. I do have, some relatives and maybe people that I know who, they can easily walk away from all that stuff and say, oh, I go look at the statue of the deity at the museum when I go visit Mexico, and that's sort of it. I've never been that way. Since I was a kid, I wanted to get every book about the mythology and figure out who was who did what were the wars, how were men created in their cosmos, what was the nature of the underworld. I've always been interested in that. And so I think there's a lot of Mexicans who go out there and try to find it, just as in the U.S. and other countries. There are people who go deeper into these older rituals and practices and beliefs. And just as a person, I actually don't try to ascribe to anything. So when people ask me, oh, are you into this stuff? Do you practice these things? I go, no, but I have an open mind about everything, just like I have an open mind about Terence McKenna and his love of mushrooms, and an open mind about what exists on the other side of the cosmos. I'm a big believer in science, observation, and then my own personal experience. But the beliefs, the stories, the legends, the names of these things, they've been baked into me since I was a little boy, essentially. And I wanted to bring this out for an American audience and say, like, look at how rich these legends are. And I hope that comes across, because I try to build the story so high up that by the time you see these things, you go, holy shit, like, what is this thing, and why didn't I know about this god from the Aztec pantheon before? Because he seems really cool,
Yeah, and I would, as I would say, I mean, we're kind of a step past myth. I mean, we're to a point where their touch is more real than that. I tend to think of myth as the stuff of ancient Greeks and Romans and those kind of things that are dead and encased in marble, and there it is, that story's over. And that's not the case with the people that I write about. It's not the case with the people who raised me. And that's not the case, I think, with some of the stories that are incorporated into the novel. They're not, what you're saying are myths, are very much part of everyday life.
Yes.
For others, and I think that's one of the more intriguing concepts of the book. My son's a huge fan of the Rick Riordan books, but because ancient Greek is ancient Greece and ancient Rome is ancient Rome, it's intriguing that he brings stuff to St. Louis, but it's also you're aware of the machine even while you're reading it. It's a clever machine, but you're aware of it. At the same time, I could take you to St. Louis, and we could meet some people for whom the myth is life. And I got that feeling reading the 13 cities, secret cities, that maybe myth isn't the word here. That these worlds were very vibrant. We're very much alive. We're not talking about Hades, that we all would agree is a fictional place. That there's blood pumping through these stories still.
I think I'll definitely take that, and I think I do agree with you. I think that's a great way of, like, maybe augmenting or seeing it from your side, because I can tell you there's evidence that goes beyond me, and that's to say, for example, with the concept of death, right? Like, if it's no longer myth, if it's actually just part of life, talking about like the cake, if it's baked in, these rituals, beliefs, and the mention of how different cosmic and metaphysical elements take place, they're already taking place. We Mexicans celebrate Dia de los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead. It's a very unusual way that we celebrate death that maybe other cultures don't have. That to me says that this is alive, it's in the blood still, because we're still doing it, and we don't even think it's a big deal. It's just what we do, and we don't even think of it as like supernatural or anything like that. It's just that's what you do when you celebrate your dead ones. So I do agree with you on that. That's an interesting take on it, and I think you're right.
And that's, and I guess, we've got a lot to cover still, but there's no Roman that, that believes in the Elysian fields anymore. Those concepts are done. But I know for myself, when I wrote about the crossroads, there are more than a few people who have their own stories about the crossroads. And as you said, the traditions that we're talking about here, there's a lot of people who would not necessarily make the concession that what you're writing about here are myth. And I think that gives the book a certain menace, when you put the book down and it's time to go to sleep, maybe not, that slight bit of hesitation that keeps you up for another 5 minutes before you drift off to sleep. That the possibilities are there, and the possibilities are realities to a lot of people.
Yeah, and again, I think it speaks to my open-mindedness as a person. Again, I'm not saying I believe necessarily in the god of war as a full entity, with a little sword or anything like that. But the way in which the book talks about these is, if we don't really understand everything about the universe and the cosmos, who are we to say that, maybe there is or isn't something that can see us or can interact with our world? And in the cases of some cultures who, interact with what they think is a being, what is that like? And is it always scary and supernatural and, terrifying? Not always. I think that's also in the book, as readers will find out. Sometimes interactions with these beings and places isn't a horror funhouse. It's actually sometimes something different. Some of them are sensual or pleasant. So there's different levels to it. So I think it speaks to the way that I am open to all these things. You're right.
And it also speaks to a necessity. Clara has not only moved physically from her parents' upbringing, but she's moved in culture, and there's a definite thought in her parents that we need to retain that connection, that it's necessary, and that we ignore it at our peril.
Yes. Yeah, and I see it happen all the time. I mean, I think not just for my culture, but when immigrants come into this country or other countries and the generations pass, sometimes there is a loss of the culture and the connectedness that some of the older beliefs bring you. And so I'm kind of on the side of her parents. I believe, okay, yeah, let's try to retain this stuff because it really makes us great human beings, brings us closer to family, and as is in the book, it helps us understand, like, why are we here, what's going to happen to us, and what happens when we die.
Now, moving along, music plays a fairly substantial part in everything I write. Plays a fairly substantial part in this book. I'm very interested in how you worked music into your book, and then I'd follow up with, as a writer, how music influences you.
Yeah.
See, it's not so easy when the questions come to you, is it?
No, and they just, you gotta look. Be quick, everybody. Even though it's a podcast, you gotta be quick. First of all, as a human being, I couldn't live without music. I mean, now if I were to go deaf at the age of 40, I would be okay because I would have the memories of the music in my head, or the vibrations, so it would be okay. But it really has saved me in many instances in life. and I have very fond memories based on music. Like music is my time machine that takes me back. I've always wanted to do a novel where music figured prominently. I've looked to people like you who bake music into their books. People like Stephen King have done this. There's really some really great examples of this stuff, and I needed to do it my way. And in this case, the element of music, because I was connecting to some stories from 12 Burning Wheels, it was already sort of there. I've always been intrigued by the way that all of us worship pop stars, rock musicians, jazz musicians, blues musicians. They are in some ways shamans, and sometimes they take the place of priests for some people. And they also channel an energy that even if I wrote a million words, I couldn't always express to you this energy that they channel through music. I think music is a really interesting element of our universe. And so, although the book, is an adventure book, it's an exploration of like, what does music have to do with us in the universe? How does it bring us to where we are? As a plot device, the way that I actually, infused it into the book is I made one character be a total music lover. So Jose Maria is a typical teenager, maybe similar to how I was I still feel I'm that way, just obsessed with certain bands and going to see their shows. That's something I can relate to. But then there is a kind of a mystical, metaphysical element of some rock bands that I could never put my finger on, and this is explored in this novel with a particular Norwegian band, Archangel, which never appears in the book, really. Not directly, and not for a long time if it does. And they're just mentioned on the side, but they seem to have clues about the 13 secret cities that no one else does. And I really wanted to do that because I'm a huge fan of on stage, like in plays or in novels. Sometimes the scariest or most interesting things are the ones that are happening off on the side that you don't even see. And so it was a really great way to explore that. And I'm always intrigued about how people see Archangel because many readers hear a different music. Some people think Archangel is like a heavy death metal band from Norway. Some people think they're more like an indie band. And then I'll give away a little secret here. To me, they sound a little more like, they have some elements of metal, but to me they actually sound more like The Knife. If people are familiar with that Swedish band, they sound like The Knife. They're super scary, electronic, but theatrical. And in my head, the way they came to me, they do have some elements of heavy metal, but I was very careful not to over-describe their music so that each person could make them sound the way they needed to sound. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So as you can tell, I get so excited about this part of the book and the writing. It is huge for me. And I actually write with music. So each of the 4 parts of the book has a corresponding playlist that I used for all of that. And I have published them before, so people can see sort of like what sounds and bands inspired me as I wrote different pieces.
Now, one of the things I had read the parts, and obviously when I realized I was going to be sitting in this chair today, went back and took a look at it. In the background, the news is talking about the insanity that's going on in Missouri as we speak, with people bracing for a riot that hasn't happened yet. And as I said, there's so much going on in this book. One of the elements is a commentary on the world that we live in now. And I was wondering, as you prepared, what struck you, because you must be listening to the same news broadcast that I am, as we all brace for a riot that hasn't taken place. I'm really interested what your outlook is on your observations of America, what it's become, the growing sense of civil unrest, and it seems like an increasing propensity towards riots, towards more violent demonstrations. We've kind of come through a period of complacency where there was nothing, you know, and now you start with the Occupy movement. You've started with a few bubbles, and now it seems to the boil seems to be rising even further. And I was wondering what you thought of that as a writer and how that influenced your writing.
That was a real motivation for the book, because politically, I think in this country we are at a boiling point. Like literally, the pot is like going like this, and then the soup is about to go out. And I don't mean to sound negative or fatalistic. What I mean by that is these things are happening. Anyone who just pays attention can see that they're rolling out these pockets of violence and unrest, and they're no different than what happens in Egypt, the Middle East, Latin America. Food riots. At the same time, I do think we're one of the luckiest countries in the world. We have the best food. We have, and by best food I mean is we don't have to go hungry. Even the poor here can get obese, right? we don't have the best healthcare, but we do have great opportunities that other countries don't have. And although technology and the internet has helped us a ton to overcome who we are and connect us or whatever, one of the points I make in the novel, but it's very, very much in the background, and maybe it's much more of a personal opinion, maybe it's not actually in the novel, but I think we're not connecting enough with each other to solve problems, and two, we're underutilizing technology. When I think about what we're using technology for, like all these little things, is consume, watch, TV, buy shit on Amazon, get things delivered, don't have to do anything. That stuff is great. I mean, I think we should enjoy our lives a little bit, but we're not using these things enough to create works of art that inspire us, to get more politically engaged, to help people in other parts of the world where they need our help. My average person that I talk to with these devices, they don't tell me, well, I'm using this to help hungry families in Bangladesh. They don't. That doesn't happen. So that's one of my points about this. I think that's where we are in the U.S., and whether it's through technology or through working with each other, we could be doing a better job of fixing the problems we have with social injustice, racism, sexism, our healthcare system. We actually do have the tools. There's that many of us that can fix them, and we're not doing it. And as long as we're not putting our heads together, we're going to see more riots like this. And riots are a huge part of the book. They're referenced from Mexico, because I actually have relatives who lived through some of those. There's the ones in the 60s here in Chicago and other places. But then now they're happening again. Even as I published this novel, the Ferguson riots happened, and that spooked the crap out of me, because I had readers tell me, oh, this feels like what I read in your book. I don't know how to explain that, but I do think I see the pot boiling, and I'm not pessimistic. I just think we need to mobilize ourselves to help the world, and not being touchy-feely and donating through Kickstarter. We need to do some hands-on things to make things a better situation. So
one of the things, and just following up on that, one of the things that struck me is Millennial Park is more or less adjacent to Grant Park, where President Obama gave that stirring speech. And I have to ask, was that intentional? Was that connection that the promise made in Grant Park is realized or not realized in the riot in Millennial Park that opens? Was that intentional on your part?
Yes, and Again, I encourage you guys to read the book so you can see what I'm talking about. I really believe fiction is sometimes the best way to explore these ideas. And so in a world where, yes, a president like Obama gives this rousing speech and we're going to fix everything and the change is coming, when some promises aren't delivered by a president such as that, that's when we ask ourselves the question, whose fault was it? Was it my fault for voting for you? Was it his fault for not getting it done? Was it his cabinet's fault for not being politically engaged enough to make the Congress do stuff? Was it the world's fault for having instability and then making things harder for us? And the book in particular is concerned with that. Is how do we figure out where the source of the problem came from? But in the case of the storytelling, the place, the actual park where he gave that speech, and then in 2013 there is a mega riot where people are killed, is meant to just turn that on its head, make you think really hard, because it's a story, first of all, but it is meant to just sort of go, okay, we're turning a negative on an image, and then when you do that, sometimes you can go, oh, maybe that's changed my point of view, or I'm questioning how I see it. I think that's something all of us should be doing all the time. President Obama is not in the novel, but there is a figure that is the mayor of Chicago figures prominently into that book, and many readers will say, oh, well, you're sort of saying oh, he's a bad guy or whatever. I encourage people to read between the lines and make their own decision, but to come back to your question, yeah, that was intentional. To set it there to get people thinking hey, Obama just spoke here when he got elected, and now this is going on.
Now, I was surprised in your response because the traditional reaction we have in the 21st century is to demonize technology. So when you say that technology is not being utilized enough because it plays a part in the book, and again, I'm trying to think how to get around this. There's some very ancient images that are captured in very modern ways. And so in this particular, in the action that opens the book, because it's captured on social media, because it's captured in 1,000 different ways, it doesn't go away. It doesn't fade. And so I was wondering, and again, it comes into contrast with these ancient traditions and beliefs. What do you see the role of technology in the book? And because there's clearly a voice here, what do you see as the role of technology moving forward as we attempt to move forward?
Well, the role of technology is. I'm going to give a tiny spoiler here, you guys, just so you have some context. But the technology seems to matter a lot to the humans in the book, in the side of the Earth, because there's this other world of Mictlan that we talk about, and the inhabitants of Mictlan have different opinions about what technology is or isn't, and we'll talk about that in the other episodes. But in our world, technology seems to be just as important as we all seem to think it is today. Oh, advances in healthcare, and look at what my iPhone does, and 1,100 megapixels. One of the things that it helps us do, and this is more to do with the internet and data storage, is like you said, images, places, words that were said, words that were spoken and written, they don't go away. Now with social media, they sort of reverberate like a giant echo chamber, and I don't think that's a bad thing. That's where I'm not down on the technology. At the same time, I don't think our human brain yet is capable of processing all this information in a very simple and effective way, and we still have emotions. We're not robots. So also processing the emotions of seeing things like the Ferguson riots, for example. We have multiple social media images and videos. You watch them over and over, and you go, is this doing something to me? Am I becoming worse or better when I see it? The novel's concerned with a lot of that, and I do believe that we should be positive about technology if we use it in positive ways, because technology got us out of some really bad spots in the past. When the book was invented, it helped the world. When antibiotics were discovered and developed, it helped the world. When radio was discovered and developed, it helped the world. The problem was some people used it for things like war or holding on to power and money. So it's complicated, but as readers will see, the way that the technology is used and reused by characters in the novel, there is a hope that we use these things for good things. And there are even some characters, and well, I don't want to give any other spoilers, but there's some rays of hope in there. But I do think technology is integral to human beings. When we talk about the gods and the creatures in Mictlan, that's a different thing. But for us, they've helped us a ton. It's helped us be safe and live longer. So I think we just need to use them more wisely, these tools.
I have a great belief that no matter how exotic the story may become, there's nowhere to hide on the printed page, and that ultimately every novel is an autobiography of some sort. When you look back at the 13 Secret Cities, and let's just deal with, because I think we're definitely just going to deal with book 1 on this episode. When you look back, what do you see of yourself reflected in that first book?
Well, I already have some ideas. I'm not an author who's not introspective, and I will probably let's make a pact. You asked me this today, but in 10 years, ask me again, because in 10 years the answer I think might be different. But as of today, this book to me is a reflection on choices I've made as a human being, in terms of freedom. I've traveled the world a lot. I've been independent a lot. I've had wonderful opportunities to experience in all sorts of parts of the world, and those do have consequences. They may mean that you don't develop stability sometimes, or you don't have a very long, extended family of your own. So there are things that I think about, and I think that the novel is hopefully a positive exploration of myself in terms of, like, out of all the things that I've lived in my life, are they going in a good direction? Now, I'm 40, so that's probably what many 40-year-olds do, right? We go, oh, okay, is all of this going in the right direction? I think I can see that already. That's sort of in the novel, but wandering and the wanderer as a character in the novel, it's an important notion to me, because I think travel and seeing the world has made me who I am. It's allowed me to write these books. And so I just hope that it's been all worthwhile. And I think it is. So I always try to come out of it from a positive side. That's sort of what I think is being reflected in the novel. I'm sure other people will argue there's other things that they see about me in there, but that's kind of the spirit in which I wrote it.
Well, I think that may be a perfect part to wrap things up, because if I move further in my questions, I think I'm going to I think we're going to start on book 12 or book 2.
Book 2, yeah.
And does that seem like an appropriate closing point to you?
I think that is great. You guys that are listening and watching, we didn't actually give you the cliffhanger of part 1, and that's on purpose, because it's a really good cliffhanger, I believe. And so as you watch this episode, check it out, get to that point, and then if you make it to part 2, then you'll be ready for an area where we're really going to jump into the spoilers, and we're going to cover some of the deeper themes of this. So I'm super excited. As far as I'm concerned, Eyre, that's a great stopping point, and we're just going to continue this series into 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm good with that. Do you want to mention now that we're at the bottom of the show, just some ways that people can find your books, how they can talk to you, because you've been the host this time, and not only do they know how to get my stuff, but since you're a new co-host of the Labyrinth, tell people how to find you.
They can find me on Amazon. I'm Eyre Price, and right now the old website is undergoing some reconstruction. So the best thing is if you pop on Facebook and look for me, Eyre Price. Send me a friend request. I'm a friendly guy. I'll like you, and we'll move forward. But I think this is a great spot to and I would suggest that people, I think, pick up the omnibus edition and read as we move forward. Because, as I said, I was very cautious about how to proceed. On the first go round, we'll be a little more into the book itself as we move forward in this series. And certainly, if anyone has questions, I think you'd encourage them in the comments below to put in comments, and you and I are always open to opening up the dialogue, and I'd love to. No one needs to listen to my questions. I'd love to incorporate what other people are getting out of the book and make this a community discussion.
That's great. Let me just mention a couple of ways people can do that, and we'll wrap up. If you go to 13secretcities.com, you have all the links that take you to the book on Kindle. You can pre-order the paperback. You can get the omnibus by jumping off from the link there. And great point, Eyre. I would love to, if there are questions that people have, go to our Facebook page. It's 13 Secret Cities. It'll come right up in search. And leave us a comment. And if you have questions about the book or things you want us to cover in the next few parts, that would be awesome. And like I said, the book is out December 9th in paperback. And we will be back. Well, we'll look at the schedule. But in the next part in this series, we'll be covering part 2. So do follow along on the omnibus. And I want to thank you so much again, Eyre. It's been really cool to have the tables turned.
Pleasure and honor are all mine, my friend, and we will get together soon.
Sounds good.
Have a good holiday.